It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon and this evening, depending on where you are in the time zone, to wrap up today's incredibly interesting sessions, this morning's research in gardens, as well as this afternoon's very uplifting discussions of education and educational opportunities at gardens. Has been a tremendous and inspiring group of presentations. So I'm at the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, and you can see our part of our magnificent magnolia collection in this image. And I just want to congratulate Oxford Botanic Gardens for reaching 400. In America, the idea that there would be a garden 400 years old obviously has not crossed our minds yet. The Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University was actually the first public arboretum to be established in the New World. And as you can see here from some of the early artwork, we were established in 1872, meaning that although we're not hitting 400, we are hitting 150 in 2022 next year. So we too will be having quite a bit of celebrating to do, as well as hard thinking about what the next 150 years mean to the Arnold Arboretum and our constituencies. So for those of you who have not been to the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, let me just tell you that Harvard University is spread across the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is where most people would normally visit Harvard University, where Harvard College is. And this is in Cambridge, but the business school, the medical school, the School of Public Health, and also the Arnold Arboretum are all across the river from Cambridge in Boston itself. And so the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University is about 6 miles away from the center sort of campus of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Our founding has a rather interesting story, which goes all the way back to 1842, when a good deal of land that had been acquired essentially by a gentleman farmer who had been a merchant and a trader bequeathed this land to Harvard University. But without any funding, the land basically sat until 1872, when a wealthy whaling merchant from New Bedford actually gave funds to create the first endowments of the Arnold Arboretum. And that was our year of founding. In 1873, the first director of the Arnold Arboretum was appointed, and that was Charles Sprague Sargent. I sometimes am amazed to think that I'm only the 8th director of the Arnold Arboretum in its 149-year history. Sargent was a man of enormous appetites and aspirations, and he immediately turned to Frederick Law Olmsted to design with him the Arnold Arboretum. For those of you who may be wondering who Frederick Law Olmsted is, he was one of the co-designers of Central Park in New York City, one of his first actual landscape and park design. And in the 1880s, late 1870s and early 1880s, he created a magnificent canvas on which the Arnold Arboretum would be built, in terms of reading the terrain, learning how to think about the movements of people within the Arboretum and its grounds. And this remains one of his great masterpieces of park and landscape design to this very day, and very much kept to his original designs and plans. Now, when they were creating Harvard's Museum of Trees, both Sargent and Olmsted, but particularly Sargent, was convinced that they would require funding to really build all of the roadway systems and everything else. And they turned to the city of Boston and thought that if it could be incorporated into the park system that was being built, that they could form a unique partnership. And in doing so, Harvard granted all of the land of the Arnold Arboretum to the city of Boston to become part of its park system. And we took a lease that was a 1,000-year lease back to control the property and to run this wonderful arboretum, which is also a free, everyday part of the public park system here in Boston. So even though we're only 150, I can tell you by design, we are supposed to exist for at least 2,000 years. And we're just in the infancy of our journey as a garden, an arboretum, and a public park. Harvard controls the property, as I mentioned, and maintains the living collections and landscape. So everyone who works here is someone who is at Harvard. We have roughly 16,000 accessioned woody plants and roughly 2,100 temperate woody plant species. It is an extraordinary crew of horticulturalists and arborists, some of the best in the world. And as a landscape and as a collection of museum objects, it is an inspiration, I think, to all who visit. To give you some idea of the quality of our collections, we are taxonomically arranged. We are home to 62 different species of acer, of maples. This is an enormous quantity of species when you think about the fact that many maples would not be able to grow in Boston because they're subtropical. But in fact, this is the finest collection of maples in the world. And this is true of many of our taxonomic collections. We have been circling the world, particularly going to Asia, where there is the highest level of biodiversity of temperate woody plants anywhere, to collect and bring these plants back to Boston to grow on our grounds. And here you can see from our archives in 1908, part of a 3-year expedition led by the Englishman, Ernest Henry Wilson, who was then hired, who had worked for Veitch, and then was hired by the Arnold Arboretum and spent the rest of his career at the Arnold Arboretum as a great collector and an amazing plants person. But we continue to this day to circle the globe. Right now we're in the midst, except for the pandemic, of collecting and usually launching 4 or 5 major expeditions per year to Japan, to China in conservation efforts, and also heavily in the southeastern US, where our biodiversity hotspot is for temperate woody plants. You can read more about what we're doing to add another several hundred taxa to our living collections to make it even stronger over the long haul, if you go to our Arnold Arboretum publication, Arnoldia. Importantly, in 2011, I opened up a brand new 45,000 square foot research facility right on the grounds, meaning that one can be working in the trees and back collecting DNA or on a microscope within a matter of minutes. And we now have roughly 100 different research projects in the living collections every year. I am one of 3 professors at Harvard whose research program is based in this building with my graduate students, postdocs, and technicians. So that's a little bit of background about the Arnold Arboretum, and I invite all of you to visit should you get the chance to be in Boston. Now on to the main topic. I want to reflect a little bit on the world that we live in and how we see plants. For me, plants in the Anthropocene have become a remarkable set of images that always seem to peer through the world of green involving satellites. Here, a satellite image from NASA, perhaps another satellite image showing all of the tropical rainforests and the deep green of South America, all of the deforestation caused by all of the fires that are burning in Brazil and elsewhere. These incredible images that basically give us walls of pixelated green. At the same time that we live in this environmental age that has been shaped by human activity, it's fair to say that we live in what I call the genomocene. And in the genomocene, I think we look at plants through the letters A, T, C, and G, strings of base pairs along this wonderful molecule of DNA. We look at chromosomes, we unwind them, we find the letters, we figure out the genes, we assemble. We compare, and we create phylogenies. But again, plants in all of these endeavors become mere abstractions. We see plants in this day through the lens of technology too frequently, and plants have become, as I said, an abstraction. My question, where are the organisms? And I want to bring Johann Wolfgang von Goethe into the discussion today because, of course, there is much to learn from him and his interactions with organisms and plants. As many of you will know, in the 1780s, he got rather sick of his duties in the Weimar Republic and took off for Italy. And he ended up writing a wonderful book, one of my favorites, Italian Journey. He made all kinds of observations in Italy of museums, art museums, of architecture, for which he's well known. But in this book, you will find many observations of natural history. Today, I watched the amusing behavior of the mussels, limpets, and crabs. What an amazing thing a living organism is, how adaptable, how there, and how itself, how useful to my knowledge of natural history, scrappy though it is, has been to me, and how I look forward to increasing it. And as he wrote from Rome in 1787, while walking in the public gardens of Palermo, it came to me in a flash that in the organ of the plant, which we are accustomed to call the leaf, lies the true Proteus who can hide or reveal himself in vegetal forms. From first to last, the plant is nothing but leaf. So Goethe went to the gardens to see his organisms in the form of plants. And of course, this led to his landmark publication in 1790 on the metamorphosis of plants, which really was the birth of the discipline of plant morphology. So again, taking inspiration from Goethe and Italian Journey, he also wrote, to wander about among a vegetation which is new to one is pleasant and instructive. It is the same with familiar objects. In the end, we cease to think about them at all. What is seeing without thinking? And this is a really elegant way of saying that all too often we live in a world which is plant blind, that we suffer from plant blindness, that although we are surrounded with plants, we don't see them. We simply do not take them in as individual organisms that are surrounding us, worthy of observation. So here is a look down at the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University. My office and laboratory are in this new research area, and I actually only live just 2 blocks from the Arnold Arboretum. And I've been wandering the grounds for nearly 11 years with just a pocket camera in hand to meet the organisms here. I won't probably get to all 16,000, I suspect, and photograph them, look at these images, reflect on them. And just to show you where I've been, I try to wander as much as I can aimlessly. I have been, the blue dots show you organisms for which I have taken a picture. To date, of the 16,000 accessions we have here, I'm almost up to 3,000. I won't live long enough to get even halfway, and almost up to 13,000 images, all of which are posted in our image database. If you want to have an image for teaching purposes or anything else of witch hazel flowers in the winter in flower, just go to our plant image search function and dial it in with hemamelis. So I want to reflect on my obsessions for the rest of the time here through the 4 seasons that make arboreta such wonderful places. Unlike a lot of botanical gardens that really, in some ways, slow down in the winter, looking at trees in the winter with snow on them is absolutely every bit as good as being here in the spring, summer, or fall. So let's begin with winter. There's nothing quite like a blizzard in the Arnold Arboretum, and I remember this blizzard well. This is about 6 years ago. We're looking into the pine collection. The snow is flying sideways. Almost everything is monochromatic. And then the next day, the skies opened up, and I went back to look at the next door neighbor spruces and firs against a deep blue sky. And I realized the genius of Frederick Law Olmsted with these reveals around these Olmstedian curves. But one thing I always love to do in the winter, beyond looking at the architecture or the bones of trees, is to go and seek out bark. And I just want to share over the last many years, the smooth barks I've met in abstraction, I'd like to think, at the Arnold Arboretum. I love the barks of the snake bark maples, which you may know are all Asian except for one species that made that biogeographic journey from Asia to North America and settled in as Acer pennsylvanicum. But these are some remarkable organisms, and they are aptly named the snake bark maples because they have that beautiful smooth skin with the waxes that look like snake skin. They need not be green. Some of them are, depending on the time of the year, white and orangish yellow, peach, lime, a little bit of olive here in our North American species, Acer pennsylvanicum. And then there is the magnificent smooth barked Acer griseum, the paper bark maple that we first received in the early 20th century. An incredible bark that peels, and when the sun is low in the horizon, the peels of bark light up as if on fire as the sun passes through them. And in abstraction, it is a magnificent thing to stand next to a paper bark maple in the winter on a sunny day. And then I wander into the beautiful birch collections, and we see the whites with the lenticels, the creams of different species, or over to the lilacs to see the beautiful olives and oranges and browns and tans. or to cornice, to our wonderful dogwoods with their reds and their mottled barks like the Coosa dogwood here. Or to our Stewartia collection, which really is showing us patina, what I think of as patina. The dark, beautiful brown that you see in the center being the most recently exposed bark, and the lighter segments that you see around it, reflecting older sections of bark on which the upper portion had peeled earlier, and they have acquired and dulled over time, essentially aging into this older set of colors and slightly different textures. But here we have another species of Stewartia, again, reminding me something of lizard skin and beautiful plates that peel independently. And here's Stewartia pseudocamellia, again, with much more recently revealed bark in the center and the deep gray patina of older bark showing on the surface. And occasionally I'm just shocked by what I see here in the elm family, the Zelkovas from China. In the winter, they begin to approach what I think of as tree giraffes with large sections of bright orange barks, surrounded by, of course, the browner or tanner barks. But sometimes at their peak in January, they truly are spotted with blotches of brilliant orange. Or Halesia, with its stripes and dark sort of ruby red alternating with stripes of white. And perhaps my favorite, one that I've been going to observe every winter as well as other seasons, but most intense in the winter, is the lacebark pine, Pinus bungiana, with the reds and the greens, the flaking and the aging. But sometimes a different specimen will throw orange and lime green. And perhaps the most breathtaking view I ever saw of a lacebark pine in the winter, here with silvers, grapefruit rind, reds, and you can see up above the beginning of a peel here that will reveal new, younger bark below. It's a magical tree. North and south facing parts of the trunk look different if you just go around 180 degrees, and they change through the seasons. They are truly dynamic. But in winter, in my view, bark is the thing to see, and this is an obsession of mine. Of course, the London plane with its interesting textures, almost like some sort of abstract set of lines that are grooved into these very smooth barks, and the unusual shapes that always delight my eye, at least, that show up when you just approach the trees. Now, spring is a magnificent time to come to the Arnold Arboretum. And if we do our job correctly, we don't have to tell people to be joyful. People and children will do cartwheels if our cherries are on show and healthy, and if we've done our pruning correctly. And I can tell you, we end up, especially during the pandemic, we've had since the beginning of the pandemic, roughly 4 or 5 million visitors on the grounds of the Arnold Arboretum, and we never closed for a single minute of the past 2 years. Of course, our crabapple collection, one of the finest in the world, is magnificent in the spring, and people come from everywhere to see it. But I am after other game in the spring, not that I don't love the crab apples. And I am after conifer cones. And most people will think of pine cones or other conifer cones when they think of them and conjure an image, they're thinking of mature cones. For example, this Table Mountain pine and its beautiful umbos and sharp prickles, but with a patina of brown or gray. This is a serotinous species, so these are very old cones. But when conifer cones emerge from bud in the spring, every year I know that spring has arrived when the first of the larix or larch species open up. And they are anything but brown. That is the only color you will not find in a conifer cone. You find pinks, reds, purples. And here you have a Siberian larch with its beautiful cone. This is the seed cone just after the bud is burst. And this is an ephemeral set of events. At most, this will be around for a week with this color before it fades or transitions to green and then ultimately to other darker colors. Here is another species of larix with a ruby red set of colors upon cone emergence, and some waxes you can see on the back. And another species, here you see Camphori of larch against a beautiful blue sky in April. And Sudasuga, the Douglas fir, actually one of the most dramatic cones. And this cone is at least an inch in overall length, with these incredible bracts with the long pointed teeth. Something to be seen and sought out every spring. And if you wait too long, matter of weeks, this very same cone that you saw with this great brilliant set of pinks becomes green with little fringes of red and ultimately brown. It's an ephemeral set of things to seek out. And then after all of that, we turn to the spruces. And the spruces are really a magnificent collection at the Arnold Arboretum. We have well over 20 species. Here is Picea jesuensis with the magnificent cones, as well as the flushing needles and the waxes on the actual bracts that subtend the ovuliferous scales. Picea wilsonii with its little cap of bud scales. Picea liquiangensis from China, magnificent, literally glowing. And these are large cones, at least an inch and a quarter in length. Just extraordinary to see a tree lit up with these cones on a sunny day. But they aren't always all red. Some of it is environmental, some of it is genetic. But here we have a plain old Norway spruce lit up in yellow with a little bit of pink at the top. And another Norway spruce, which is a little bit of yellow at the bottom with much more pink at the top, and a fringe, if you look at the yellow ovuliferous scales, a fringe of pink on the margins of each scale. And here is one from another tree, just showing you how much variation there can be just within a species growing on our grounds in color. This is Picea abies again, all red, no yellow. And here the dragon spruce, Picea asperata, with magnificent large cones, just beautiful, brilliant reds. But lest you think that every spruce is going to be red, this year I finally got a chance to see the dragon tail spruce, Picea pallida. And there, glowing in the sun, were beautiful ovuliferous scales subtended by small bracts that were basically a lime green. And in abstraction, just magnificent to come back to, but only for a week. And if I miss them this year, I have to wait another year. So the cones of the Arnold Arboretum in the spring are the thing that I have ritualized to a certain extent, and I continue to be surprised. The pines come on with their darker red and purple as they flush. Here you see the mugo pine just at the point of bud break with the scales and the ovuliferous scales and the bracts. And then finally, the firs. Here we have the Korean fir, only green. And this year, something I had never seen before, the Himalayan fern, here a small specimen, essentially almost jet black cones with a beautiful glow of purple when you get a little closer. This was something I had not anticipated. And fortunately, it was a young tree, so I could see the cones, and it may have been one of the first years it had actually reproduced, but it took my breath away. It was the highlight of my spring. Then we move into summer. And I think of all of the greenness of the grounds, and an arboretum is just embodiment of leaves and photosynthesis, and a good deal still of flowering going on. But for me, there's a regular ritual that I visit the rhododendrons, and I look at Vissen threads. And many people will say, I've never heard of a Vissen thread. And as a graduate student, I had read all about what Vissen threads are, and I'm going to tell you what they are in a second. But it's one thing to intellectualize something in a paper or a book, and it's another thing to see it. And through the years from my graduate school days on, I had never done anything except know about them. I had never seen them, and I'd never sought them out, frankly. And then one day I went, after the rain had stopped at the Arnold Arboretum, to look at rhododendrons, to see the droplets on the surfaces of the various flowers and the leaves. And I took this picture of a Chinese rhododendron species, Rhododendron fortunei. And I came back, and as I do with each image, I that evening look at it, I frame it up, I think about it, I reflect, and I noticed something very strange. Here is, of course, you've got the petals, you've got this beautiful green long style and stigma, and then around it you have the male parts, the stamens, and these are the anthers. And I looked and I noticed that the anthers had something coming out of them. And I started to look more carefully. And here on a sunny day, I found that coming out of each anther was a string of pollen grains, joined one to the other by what I had read about, which is a mechanical structure called a viscid thread. And in this species, the viscid threads must be very strong. If I just tap the flower, each of the anthers will pour out all of its contents in a single string of pollen grains. Here they are again, and you can see these are poricidal anthers. This means that when they are releasing their pollen, they literally pop off a cap and open up a pore. And if they're just jiggled a little bit, they end up pouring out beautiful strings of pollen grains, more beautiful than any pearl necklace or diamond necklace you could see in the finest of Tiffany's or any jewelry store in London, for example. And here they are close up again, these beautiful chains. It turns out all rhododendron species do this. But how many of you have actually walked by a rhododendron and seen it? And yet all of us have been in gardens with rhododendrons in flower. And here they are. I did put them under my stereo microscope to show you what the pores look like. And here you can just pull them right out by running your finger across the pore. They just literally stick to your finger. There is the entire content of a single chamber of an anther from Rhododendron fortunei. And again, under the stereo microscope, they're actually tetrads of pollen grains. And let me show you now the beautiful wiry coil of viscid threads that I'd read about as a young man many years ago, but got to see for the first time by accident by wandering and looking at organisms in the Arnold Arboretum. And here they are under the scanning electron microscope. But this is something any of us can do if we make our mind up to go to a garden or to our backyards and interact with a rhododendron. And now I want to take you to autumn, which is the season we're in now. And at the Arnold Arboretum, if you come to the second highest point in Boston, which is not a particularly high point, nevertheless, you have a beautiful view over our 281 acres to see the skyline of Boston and the trees across the property in their various shades of green, browns, golds, and everything else. And if you come to our hickory collections with the light low in the sky in the late afternoon, you walk in an understory that's dark and you look up and you see the shocks of gold in the hickories lit up, literally glowing. And it is a magnificent thing to take in. So I'd like to emphasize how important it is to look up during the fall. It's wonderful to have vistas, but sometimes you just need to get under a tree. And I've been doing this for years, and I do it actually in the winter. I do it actually in the spring too, but the fall is quite a wonderful time to just get under a tree. And here you have one of the willow oak just starting to get its beautiful colors, but you get the architecture, and on a sunny day, you get the glow of the leaves. Our sweet gums, one of my favorite specimens here, massive specimen with beautiful bark, and that beautiful characteristic of having fully green leaves at the same time that you have fully gold leaves, but great architecture. And here, one of our hickories with its dark brown bark and its glowing canopy of gold. And another one of our hickories with its incredibly large compound leaves just glowing in our collections. And here, the golden larch from China with its beautiful monopodial form straight up into the sky, and the yellow-green of the needles and the short shoots aglow. And I just sometimes park myself for a little while to contemplate things. Here, just a beautiful sugar maple with its great color in the fall, or the reds of the black oak here at the Arnold Arboretum at that perfect moment when every leaf just seems to be as red as it could possibly be. Or the smoke tree against the blue sky. Or the ginkgo lit up by the sun at its peak. Or the dawn redwood. And the Arnold Arboretum was the first garden in the world to have seeds come from China after its discovery being alive in the 1940s. We received our first seeds in 1948 in January, and we have the oldest trees in cultivation still here on the grounds outside of China. And as simple as a plain old red maple leaf is always well framed at the end of the year in the fall against a blue sky. The fruits are always on show in the fall in an arboretum, even if it's just a simple hawthorn with the old sepals and the old curled remnants of the stamens and the filaments. They're quite beautiful. Or the viburnums against a blue sky. Or something like the catalpas. And I do love catalpas and their wild long fruits just framed by nothing but blue. Or Eleagnus with its amazing peltate hairs, trichomes on the fruits. Or something that's throwing a late flower like this Chinese Abelia. Or something that's not throwing a late flower too, but the fall flowering American species of Hamamelis or witch hazel virginiana, which is normally flowering in the fall. The only witch hazel, in fact, the rest all flower in the winter. So I want to finish by just talking about one single organism in this collection at the Arnold Arboretum, and a magnificent mutant, the sun and the moon. And I go back to Aristotle in the 4th century BCE. He wrote, "Why is it and that an eclipse of the sun, if one looks at it through a sieve or through leaves such as a plane tree or other broadleaf tree, or if one joins the fingers of one hand over the fingers of the other, the rays are crescent shaped where they reach the earth?" This was from his Problematica. And we have this wonderful European beech. It's a mutant form, tortuosa, that grows in the wild in France, Germany, and in Poland in populations there. This was a gift to us from Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, in 1888, and we've been taking care of it ever since. And on a specific day that you can see listed in the bottom right, I went to this tree because there was going to be a solar eclipse in New England. And I knew the bark would be smooth, and if I just sat there quietly alone, even though there were people everywhere, under this one tree, I would begin to see the moon carve out the sun into crescents that were caused by the pinholes of the leaves as acting as pinhole cameras in the canopy above my head. And here you can see the solar eclipse rotating through beautifully with this incredible moon cutting out the sun into these crescents on the smooth bark of a beech. And here on the ground, you can see the hundreds of images from the pinholes of the overlapping leaves of this one single magnificent specimen of the tortuosa form of European beech. It was perhaps the highlight of my life in the collections here. So I stopped by saying, we have to come back to Goethe, and we have to take the botanical garden world, our gardens and our arboreta, and remember that they are the entry point for people to interact with plants as organisms, as the actual embodiment of the photosynthetic world. And as Goethe said, what an amazing thing a living organism is, how adaptable, how there, and how itself. Thank you.